Susie Sheep lived an ordinary life, no different from other children. But without a father, her mother had a hard time. She worked 10 hours every day to earn a living for her daughter. She was employed sewing clothes, a labor that paid very little. She had no savings. Her house was inherited from her husband. But one day she received a job offer. She had an interview and would finally be able to get the high salary she had dreamed of all these years. She immediately quit her old job that she hated so much. Soon her life would get better. But 4 days later, she gets a call. Something has changed, and now they don't need an employee. She tried to call her previous job, but it was already taken. Not having a job would mean she'd soon run out of money to pay her bills and food for herself and Susie. She tried to find some place to work, but everywhere either had no jobs or she didn't know how to do the job. Mummy Sheep realized that she had no savings left, but she was told on the phone that she could be hired in a week's time. She sold some unnecessary things to buy food and waited. And towards the end of that week, she received a call. She was told again that they could not provide a place to work. Mummy Sheep didn't get much sleep that day. She couldn't bear to think about what was going to happen next, but she was not allowed to drag her daughter into this. She began to eat less. Now she didn't buy expensive foods like eggs and sweets. At the same time, she looked for a job, but she couldn't find one. One day she went to the store, picked up some groceries, and the payment failed, but she'd already sold everything she could. And she remembered a thing that's valuable here. It's her wool. She rented a shaving machine and shaved off all the wool. It was enough wool to make one beautiful dress. She was able to sell it and got the money. It was a lot of money for her. Things made from animal products were very valuable here. The money would be enough to last her for weeks. However, a week went by, and someone decided to hire her to work as a cashier. She was overjoyed because now she would be able to get back to her normal life. But when she went for the interview, she was thrown out. No one wanted to hire her because of her appearance. No one liked the fact that she had no wool at all. So Mummy Sheep realized she had to wait for her hair to grow back. That could take a long time. She paid no water, electricity, gas, or heating bills. She ate only the cheapest food, but it didn't help. The money ran out, so she decided to shave her daughter. Susie Sheep resisted, but she had no choice. Her wool made a sweater. She quickly managed to sell it because it was already fall, the season for selling woolen goods. Susie had since stopped going out. She was embarrassed by her appearance. All she did was lie in bed and go out to eat occasionally. But over the past few days, the temperature has dropped rapidly. They stayed at home in the cold. The heating had not been turned on because of non-payment of bills. Because they had no wool, they were very cold. They had no warm blankets. Mummy Sheep had sold most of their belongings. But they tried not to get desperate. Until one day, Susie Sheep fell ill. She woke up and felt very tired. Chills and fever. Being in the constant cold was dangerous for a young body. And in addition to illness, she suffered from loneliness. Mummy Sheep bought medicine and found she was left with almost no money. Buying the medication was not part of her plans. She needed to change something urgently. Mummy Sheep waited until nightfall and left the house. She went to the supermarket. There was no one there at night. It was so cold that she was afraid of getting sick herself. She smashed the front glass door with a rock and went inside. She was scared. She had never stolen in her life. In their village, stealing was treated very strictly. She took some food, a blanket, and a toy she saw on the shelf. She reached home, covered Susie with the blanket, and went to sleep. In the morning, Susie got some delicious food and her new toy, which became her only friend for as long as she grew fur. Eventually, Mummy Sheep managed to find a job, and better times came for their family. But now the fear of being without food and sustenance will never leave them. Peppa Pig loves to go to the beach with her family. On this sunny day, they were going to have a vacation together. When they arrived, the beach was empty. There was no one around. However, that was just the way they liked it. A vacation for one family that no one would disturb. Peppa went to play ball with George. Daddy Pig wanted to play with them, but Peppa had her own idea. She really wanted to bury him in the sand. It seemed to her that it was just a fun activity that couldn't hurt. But she was wrong. After Peppa and George buried him under the sand, he felt the heat of the scorching sun, and he began to fall asleep. Peppa and George were making sand castles. They were playing together so much that they completely forgot that Daddy Pig was lying buried in the sand. At that point, his body temperature had risen to dangerous levels. Lying under the sun in the heat, while he was sleeping, he didn't notice how he was in this situation. He started sweating profusely. His heart started beating fast. His temperature rose so much that he got a heat stroke. At this time, Mummy Pig and the children had played and started to go back. But suddenly they saw a hat on a heap of sand standing in the water, which was brought by the tide. Mummy Pig didn't realize what it was at first, but then she remembered Peppa burying Daddy Pig in the sand. While they were playing, there was a rush of water. She told the children to stand on the shore. She ran there and, standing waist deep in the water, removed his hat. Daddy Pig was unconscious. She started to dig out his top half, but his body started to fall into the water. She tried to hold him down. Their children were watching from the shore. They were scared to see it, but there was nothing they could do to help because Mummy Pig told them to stand still. Mummy Pig managed to get him safely onto the water. She couldn't carry him off because of his great weight. But things got worse. The low tide had started to come in. She only had to hold him, waiting for the tide to go out. Otherwise, he would be swept out to sea and have no chance of surviving. But suddenly, Peppa, ignoring the instructions, ran towards them. Peppa, who had been running to meet Mummy Pig, now got caught in the current herself and was being carried through the water. Mummy Pig could not swim to her by saving Daddy Pig. She had to make a choice. She had to save someone alone. She let go of Daddy Pig's body and swam after Peppa. George was crying as he watched the situation from the shore, and Mummy Pig managed to save Peppa. Sitting down on the sand, they watched Daddy Pig being carried far away on the waves, and there was nothing they could do to help.
Where is George?
It was a cloudy day. Peppa Pig's family went to look at the mountains. It was a good viewpoint with a view of nature. They had already had a good time and were about to leave, but Daddy Pig found George missing. They started calling for him, but he didn't respond. Soon the police began a search. They searched the entire mountain, but George seemed to have disappeared without a trace. They then began to search deeper into the woods. And after a while, George woke up. It was a dark, damp place. His whole body ached. Having fallen from such a height, he had only broken his arm. He scratched himself on the walls of the sewer as he fell, and he cried out in fear and pain. But no one heard him. For that moment, they were looking for him down the mountain. It began to rain. Mrs. Rabbit went back to the top of the mountain to continue her work and wait there for George. She hoped he would be able to find his way back, but he was right beside her, and his cries were now drowned out by the sound of the rain. The rain continued to pour, and George, sitting in the hole, gradually became soaked. The water was rising, and George could feel the cold creeping into his bones. He was up to his waist in the cold water, and breathing became increasingly difficult as there was little oxygen in the air around him. Time stretched slowly, and each moment seemed like an eternity. Finally, the rain stopped, and it was already evening. Miss Rabbit was about to leave work, but she heard a baby crying. She was shocked. She immediately called George's family to inform them that he had been found and called the rescue team. George was given a blanket and some food so he could wait for the rescuers. He wasn't so scared anymore because he knew he would be taken care of. And as it started to get dark, Mr. Bull arrived. He arrived with a construction crane that would bring down a special place where George could lie down. The work to rescue George has begun. The crane kept going down and down. It stopped as the chain ended. George's rescue crate hovered in the air a meter above him. Mr. Bull assessed the situation. To dig George out would require digging a great deal of soil from the top of the mountain. At the same time, after a rainstorm, the walls of the drain could collapse on George. The nearest place to extend the chain was an hour away, but action was urgent. He got a rope and used it to lengthen the chain. The situation became critical. Everyone was in shock and didn't know what to do. Was George alive? And how do we get to him now? Mr. Bull went to lengthen the chain, and Peppa's family stayed behind to monitor George's condition. A couple of hours later, Mr. Bull returned and pulled the crane down for George. This time it worked. An ambulance was already on the spot to pick him up. But the police arrested Mr. Bull because he had built this drain here. The sewer was dug in a place where it is absolutely unnecessary. The water from the rain drains down the mountain by itself. Also, it was not made according to standards. These mistakes led to George nearly losing his life. Peppa likes to feed the ducks, and this time she was sitting with her family on a picnic. As usual, they prepared a separate loaf to crumble it to the ducks. This time, however, there was something wrong with the duck. There was trash attached to its leg. It moved with a limp. Peppa was alarmed and took it to her parents. They realized that the trash on the duck could have hurt her leg and caused inflammation. Daddy Pig didn't want to take the duck to the vet because it was just an animal living in the wild, but Peppa begged him. They took the duck to Mrs. Hamster. She examined the duck and saw that the rubbing of garbage had caused inflammation in its leg. Perhaps if Peppa had seen this duck a couple days later, the leg would have had to be amputated. She removed the litter and said that it would probably go away on its own now, but that it should be given pills if it develops any negative symptoms. Peppa released this duck outside the house. She realized that she now needed to keep a close eye on its condition. And now she went over and fed the duck every day. She even named it Daisy. One day she found a clutch of eggs near the lake that her favorite duck had laid. But the next day she saw that the duck was getting worse. Apparently her immune system couldn't handle the infestation. Peppa took the pills Mrs. Hamster had given her, put them in a piece of bread so she could feed it to the duck, and she went looking for it. Peppa didn't find her at the lake where she usually saw her, but after searching around, she did find the duck. Now the duck looked even worse. Maybe without the pills it would have died, but Peppa